Okay, hello. Okay, can you hear me now? Wicked. Um, so welcome to the second companion video for Data 9100 Assignment 1. I was looking through the previous video, which outlines a simple outsourcing problem where we're trying to determine what the cheapest option is to produce our good, given manufacturing it versus outsourcing it. And I thought that I would provide a second option for those who might be a little bit more keen. And so I'll just share the screen here. And we can discuss a second way that we might want to do this problem. And so in this situation, instead of the problem presented in the previous video, which outlines a way of putting things into tables and then referencing those tables and copying and pasting them for different situations. What if we want to produce a similar graph to the one that we had in our lecture, in our example, where we're looking at the um, cost with all of the different options that we might have throughout the spectrum of the volume that we're producing. And so what we'll do here is just walk through this as an example for producing a little bit more of a comprehensive model instead of such a situation-based model. So in this case, we'll again start with a new a new sheet, and we'll go ahead and start off the same way that we had started before. So we'll start off with our outsourcing problem as a little bit of a title for our slide, for our sheet. And then we'll come down a little bit, and instead of putting things into tables like this, where we have one for manufacturing and one for outsource, let's combine them together. And let's put one row for the type, one for the variable cost per unit, and one for the fixed cost. Now let's go and if we wanted to make this actually fit, one way is to grab it like this and change the width. But if you actually just go up to this one and you double click it, it will make the column as wide as your widest entry within that column. Now let's go and we'll separate out our manufacturing and our outsourcing. And the values that we had before were $10 if we manufacture it alone, and $12 if we outsource it. And if we choose to manufacture, there is a fixed cost of $5,000 for us to produce all of the materials together. Let's go ahead and make that as wide as we need and that one as wide as we need. We can, as we did in the last video, change these to be currencies. And again, we can call this 0 because that is 0. And let's, instead of in the last example, how we put the tables kind of looking at a single one of the volumes, let's structure our table a little bit differently so that we can calculate it for every type of volume. So we'll have one column that says the volume. We'll have one column that will be the cost of manufacturing. And we'll have one column that is the cost of outsourcing. So what we can do is let's just start off with a volume of 0. And we can then think about how we want to form these equations. And as Nick mentioned in our last video, you can do these references where you say, I want you to take the volume, I want you to multiply it by our variable cost, and then add our fixed cost. And then if you want to do our absolute rather than the relative referencing, we can add our dollar signs. But because we're trying to do this a little bit more clearly and maybe a little bit more replicably, let's try it a different way. So what we can use in Excel is something called names. And if you go up to the search bar and you click right down Name Manager, you can open this thing. You can access it by Control or F3. And the other way that you can do it is with your keystroke commands. So Alt, I, N, D. Now, Alt is one of my favorite things in Excel because it allows you to access anything in your banners or the search bar using just keystroke commands. So we're going to start with Alt, I, N, D, and that brings up our name manager. And so what we can do is instead of doing this cell reference to these obscure things, B4, B5, what does that really mean? What we can do is we can name them. And so we know that we're looking at this problem as a linear problem. And so the equation for a line is y equals, I'm just going to add this in another spot here. Y equals mx plus b, if we look back to our very basic high school stuff. So what this is that the volume, y, is equal to something times the times our x, which is our number the total cost, which is the thing that we're trying to calculate here, is equal to our some slope, m, which is the cost per unit, which is going to be our x, the volumes, plus some sort of a y-intercept. And so for manufacturing, our m is going to be our cost per unit, and our b is going to be our fixed cost. Our volume is going to be our x, and then each of these is going to be our y's. And so we can calculate for each of these. But one thing that we can do is if we wanted to, again, go back to the name manager, and that was through Alt-IND, we can click New, and then we can pick these different cells, and we can name them what we want to call them. And so for this one, I'm going to call it man M, because it is our manufacturing slope, our M variable. So we call it that, we click OK. And then we can do that for each of these different ones. And so we highlight this and we say, I want the fixed cost to be called the man B. And then we can do it again for our outsourcing. So this is going to be our out M. We'll say that it's going to be this cell. And then we can do our out B. And we call it this. So once we've done that, you click close, and that all of those things will be there. So now we can reference those in our functions to be able to actually calculate these things. The next thing that we want to do is one of my other favorite formatting things in Excel, which is to use tables. And so if you have a block of information, you can tell Excel that it's going to be in a table. And if you want to do that, you can highlight the whole thing. You can go to format as table, and you can pick any of these wonderful color schemes. The other way that you can do it is if you highlight your thing and you just press Control L, and then it will tell you, it will automatically go to this whole block of information that we have together, and it will say, is this your table, and does it have column headers? And in this case, the situation is yes. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I like using tables as opposed to just working with Excel's regular things. One of them is that you can reference the row within the table, and it will tell you that it's just looking at that column. And so if we're starting our formula for manufacturing, we can say, it's going to be something to do with the volume. So we write the equal sign, and we just press the left key, and it says at volume. And this syntax means that it's not just looking at this whole column. The at symbol means that it's going to look at volume in this row. And so every row within this table, it's going to calculate something based on volume. And we know that we're looking at volume times our M. And because we named them before, we can just refer to that as man M. And it's going to go to that cell. And then we can add our man B. And if we click this, it makes sense because if we have 0 volume, it's 0 times 10 plus 5,000. Now we can do that for our outsourcing as well. So let's try that again. So we say equals the volume times out M plus out B. And you'll see that I made some typos there, but Excel doesn't recognize the case sensitivity of things that you've named. So you can just go ahead and click enter on that. And now if we click into this, you can see that, first of all, in this function bar, you can clearly see what is happening. We're saying we're taking the volume from this table, we're multiplying it by some variable out M, and we're adding out B. And to me, this is a lot more clear than if we're using relative or absolute referencing with the dollar signs. I know it pops up, but when I pass along work to someone else, I think that it's helpful to have it be clear where these variables are coming from. And if you wanted to be able to change them, you could change where those are located with the name manager, or you can go up and change these values. So let's say that instead of a fixed cost of 0, we had $1 just for starting our account. Then we can add that in there and it will automatically update that whole row. So let's change that back to 0. Let's go ahead and say now we want to extend this. So we can now just start writing different volumes. So let's say 100 units, 200 units, 300 units, 400 units. And it will automatically populate our model for each of these because each one of these is going to take the volume in that row and multiply it by those numbers. But let's say that we wanted to not have to type it out so much. Let's try a different method. So let's go into this cell and we say equals the cell above it plus 100. We have this wonderful option here, which says overwrite all cells in this column with this formula, which gives us an error. But that's because this cell here is trying to add the cell above it to 100, and it doesn't like that. So let's just change that to a 0. And all of a sudden, it gives us this little warning that this cell is calculated differently, inconsistently calculated column formula. So we know that that cell is calculated differently than the rest, but we can grab this little thing at the bottom here, and we can actually extend this table as far as we want it to go. And so now we can automatically populate kind of a more comprehensive model about these things. The next thing that we can do is one of the other cool things about tables is if you write into a column beside the table and you do a function, it will assume that you want that function for all of the cells in the table. So here, if we say which is cheapest, we can extend that, and we can do the same thing that we did last time where we used the if function. So we write equals if manufacturing, and we say at manufacturing is greater than outsource, then we want it to say that outsourcing is the cheapest because outsourcing is less than manufacturing. And then in the case where that's false, we want to say manufacturing is cheaper. So now we click enter and it fills out this whole column and it says, oh, outsourcing is still cheaper all the way up to this point. But if we extend this table further, we can see that manufacturing becomes cheaper at around 2,500 here. Now, let's add one more thing where we can insert here. And because we have our X variable in the left column, we can just simply put a scatter plot. Oh, let's highlight these columns and then we'll see if it likes us that way. We'll go and we'll do a scatter plot and we can just make it lines. And so now we have a graph. And this graph is going to update if we extend this. So now it's at 4,000, but we can grab this little arrow at the bottom and extend it as far as we want to extend it. Keep going down. And now you can see that it goes past 6,000. Yeah, and so if we wanted our names there, maybe instead of doing it this way, we highlight the column headers with it as well. And then we can do the same thing where we do our scatter plot. And now you'll see that it has our manufacturing and outsourcing labeled. And so we can look at some of the other different visualization techniques that you might want to use there. But this is a more comprehensive method of modeling our very simple outsourcing problem. So if you sat through this whole video and you are able to complete this, you can submit it as a bonus and I'll give you an extra 1% on your assignment. So thanks so much for your time and good luck with the rest of it.